Kyle Tierman here. I'm in Cape Town.
I was the only journalist in northern Nigeria.
Not an adventure until you get lost in Tijuana.
If you get caught inside by a giant wave, you feel really alone.
I love the adventure of waking up and not knowing what will happen and that being my job.
Well, I was going to say, in a way, I'm glad that we had technical difficulties
Yes.
and tried to do this remotely.
Dude, totally.
Do it for real.
There's a je ne sais quoi to the podcast.
Yes, as the French podcasters
As
say.
the French podcasters say, which you dabbled in France for your book.
I did. I dabbled. Yeah. So for the book, and also just for life, my brother-in-law and I took a trip. Originally, it was like a romantic trip that my wife and I had planned to the Basque Country in Spain and France. And then my brother-in-law and I, we were going to go to Ireland. Just like no decent surf for a week. So we scrambled to replan something. I was like, what if we repurpose this romantic vacation with my wife into a surf trip with her brother?
That's how it always works.
Kind of worked out.
Yeah.
She's been really surprisingly like gracious about it, because I feel like she was well within her rights to be like, what the hell?
Yeah. Not like my fiance.
She was cool about
my
it.
fiance is so smart that like when we go somewhere, she's like, she'll make sure it's inland, so there's like no chance. That's actually, well, I mean, I that's not exactly true, because she does surf, which is a fun thing. Does your wife surf at all?
No, Jackie took a surf lesson. That was our deal at one point. We went to Hawaii, but it was not a surf trip, and I was like, I will stop talking about surfing a tiny bit if you take one lesson.
Right.
And then I expected that she would really like it, and she hated it.
Okay.
And partly I think it was the lesson, right? Like they set her up as a regular foot, and then afterward she was like, it feels like this would be a lot easier if my right foot were forward. And I was like, did anyone ask you which foot? And she was like, no.
Yeah.
So it was like, I don't think it was a totally fair introduction, but I was like, all right, that was the bargain.
Yeah,
so
it's like lefties in the 1930s. They're just like,
yeah, exactly. Like just learn it with the other hand. Well, and I think she was like, well, that's like your thing and Matt's thing, and so I'm gonna go ahead and let you guys have your thing, which I respect that.
Well, I as I said, I so enjoyed the book, and I the first thing I wanted to ask is just about the writing process. At what point did you realize that you were going to write the book?
Yeah.
In the journey, like how long does the book take over a timeline course?
Well, let me ask a quick question.
Sure.
Are you going to record an intro or something beforehand, or should
totally.
I explain who I am?
Yeah. No,
we'll
I'll
assume
record.
People already
People
know.
will know
all about me.
People will
Okay.
know. It'll be like an hour.
Yeah,
intro.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like a podcast just to introduce the fact that we're going to talk on
In
a
the
podcast.
third grade, David got a B on his math test. It's tortured him ever since.
And that's why I wrote this book about surf.
Yeah.
So for me, I wrote 2 books, and then I made my wife promise never to let me write another book, because writing books is hard. And then I started surfing kind of at the tail end of the pandemic, very much thinking this is like a hobby. I'm not a hobbies guy. Like, I've never had a hobby. And I was like, okay, I'm going to have a hobby, and I'm going to try surfing. And then a couple things started to happen. So number 1, I was embarrassing myself a lot, and I was like, oh, this is funny. Number 2, I was learning stuff. And then number 3, the stuff I was learning, I realized wasn't just about the surfing. It was like, it was changing who I was in ways that I was like, oh, I think other people, even if you don't surf, you would find this helpful. And for me, those are like the 3 conditions. If you're writing about yourself, right? Like for me, just because I like to write funny stuff, it's like, am I embarrassing myself?
Yeah.
Am I learning stuff? And would other people be interested in what I'm learning?
That's the criteria for the book.
So then I started working on my wife being like, remember when I made you promise to never let me write another book? What if you broke your promise that I made you make? And eventually she was like, yeah, okay, it's a good idea for a book. So.
Sure. Through that, had you already started surfing with your brother-in-law, Matt, and you were like going out, you were getting better, you're like, hey, this is fun. And then there's this kind of aha moment where you're like, this fits the criteria of a book. I'm going to now start turning all that into material.
So I had started surfing kind of on my own, and originally I didn't tell Matt, my brother-in-law, that I was surfing, because he's a pretty good surfer and I was and am not. And was like, okay, I don't want to even like I don't want to be in a situation where like I was just embarrassed, right? I was like, he wasn't mean about it, but I was a little ashamed. And then as I kind of got hooked, I was like, oh, I need someone to keep me from dying, and I don't know anyone else who surfs other than like the 2 or 3 instructors who I paid for a lesson.
Sure.
So I was like, all right, I guess I'm gonna have to tell Matt that I'm surfing and start surfing with him if he's up for it. And so that's when I let him know. Of course, it turned out he knew that I'd been surfing, but we started surfing together. And it wasn't originally like that was part of the book, but it wasn't what I would call like the main thrust of the book. And then it was actually in the editing process. So I turned in a draft. I was working on it with my editor, Max. And it was at a certain point where Max and we had to sit down with this like 110,000 word book. The final book's about 72,000 words. And we were like, what is this about? Right? Like, I think that's a big part in the book process. At least it has been for me, of being like, you have a draft, you're done. Then you're like, what do we have here? Especially if it's a story that's like not, it doesn't have an obvious beginning and an end. It was like, it was just this guy starts surfing and then he keeps surfing. And what we realized is really 3 stories happening simultaneously, right? So there's this story about me and learning to surf. There's this story about kind of my own sense of self and like starting off in a place of like pretty intense depression and trying to kind of reconnect with the world. And then there's the story about me and Matt becoming friends. And we realized that the 3rd story was the most interesting. That's the one, like, because it's about a relationship between people. And I think that's, whenever I've written like scripts and stuff, they're all buddy comedies. I don't know, I just like that format. And so I was like, wait a second, I'm living a buddy comedy. I should lean into that, And it was also a little bit too, I will say, me saying like, as a surfer, there's only so much. My authority as a writer does not come from my like sick surfing skills, right? It comes from my writing and also sort of observing the relationships and storytelling skills. So that's again leaning into what works.
You give very impressive details of your surf sessions, and as someone who's been surfing since he was 9 years old, it was fun for me to look at this sport through a beginner's eyes again. And I gotta say, like, I went into this book because I had 2 people recommend it to me, and I'm like, okay, like, Kook Surfer writes a whole book about his experience surfing, like, woohoo, can't wait to get into this, right?
Exactly.
And like, that was my favorite part of it, was like you described a soft top like a day old baguette, I believe, like shit that's just like so. I'm so close to the sport, I never would have noticed that, and you do that like again and again and again in these surf sessions where I'm like, fuck, that's a really good way to describe a wave, the feeling of going underwater, the feeling of wiping out. Did you take notes immediately after your surf sessions? Like, what was it like for you to nail all those details, or do you just have a photographic memory?
So totally the opposite of a photographic memory. It's a weird thing because I have now written, already we're talking weird stuff. I've written 2 memoirs and I'm not 40 yet, which I say and I'm like a little embarrassed about. And this was the first book of a 2-book deal. So I'm going to write another memoir. And so, this is like true story about myself,
you're
right?
like David Sedaris. You're just going to make a whole
that's
career,
the dream, right?
Whole career about yourself,
right?
And memoir.
And I love books that you're reading someone talk about themselves, but in a way where you're like, oh, but I'm learning about myself too, right? But it's hard to do, especially if you are really bad at remembering what's going on. And for this book, what I realized I needed to do is I just surfed with an Apple Watch. And then the moment I got back in the car, I'd get on a voice memo and start recording. And actually, I kind of did it. It's also the way when I write speeches for people sometimes. Like if I have clients, like, I still do speech writing for clients. So if I'm writing a speech, let's say like you were giving a commencement, right? I would probably sit down and I would start by just recording our conversations and then transcribing those. And that's the basis for the speech. And then I was like, oh, if I'm writing my own story, I should just do the same kind of thing because it works really well.
Right.
And that made it a lot easier. And the other thing too, and I appreciate you saying that about some of the descriptions, because for me, the other piece is I'm always trying to challenge myself as a writer, where the thing that I don't do as well as a lot of other writers that I admire is descriptive writing. So in this book, I was like, okay, I'm still not like a descriptive writer. Like that's not my strongest suit, but I'm gonna lean into a weakness and like really try to do a better job of that than I've ever done.
Yeah. I felt, and you can tell me if I'm way off on this, that what you need to hold back on in writing are your zingers.
Yeah.
Like you could write a page that's just like zinger, 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 zinger,
Yeah.
zinger,
And then
zinger,
you gotta
zinger,
delete
and then you're
most
just like,
of
what the like, and then it gets annoying as a reader. Like that works for an Onion post or a joke, but I do find that a lot of joke writers have a harder time with books because they try and be too clever and they're afraid to let a page go without a laugh.
Yeah.
But then ultimately what you get is like a bunch of tiny laughs rather than like build up to a bigger one. And I mean, they're fucking, he looked like a man who had not just seen the face of God, but had done cocaine with him. I mean, fucking great line. You have a ton of zingers in there, but did you have to hold back?
Are there too many?
Yeah.
I think, it's interesting. I wouldn't say I had to hold back as much as I had to delete, right? Like, and there's a couple reasons for that. So as a writer, again, I think almost all writers have a crutch, right? And for me, it's jokes, but even more than that, it's analogies.
Yeah.
So I would say, and again, I'm not trying to talk down my own book. Like if you're listening or watching to this
It's a great
conversation,
book. It's the best book.
You should read the book,
Yeah.
right? Like you should buy 20,000 copies and share them with all of your neighbors.
Yeah.
And I genuinely think if you read the book, you'll like the book. That said, if they gave me one more pass, right? I mean, you know this as a writer. If you got another pass, you would make edits, right? That's just always true. A lot of the edits I would make are like, I would cut, maybe like 1 out of every 5 remaining analogies, right? Just because for me, what happens is when I don't know what I want to say, I often kind of load things up with jokes, analogies, whatever, just so that I have something to be like, oh yeah, that's good, right? That sounds good. And later, it's almost like scaffolding, right? And then, and it's because I'm confident in it. And then later, and again, it helps to have a good editor. I really liked my editor who I worked with on this book, where you can work to then say, all right, now we know what the book's about. Let's take away the scaffolding, except for the really good stuff, right?
Yeah.
Let's leave the stuff where we're like, oh, we can't take it out. But anything else, let's pretend it never happened. And for me as a writer too, it's like, the thing I always push myself to do, and it is shockingly difficult, at least for me, is just delete it and read it again and see what happens. I don't know how people did it when you had to have like handwritten, parchment or whatever. But for us, it's like you can see what it looks like without that joke. You can see what it looks like without that chapter. Right. And then sometimes you're like, oh, I didn't even notice it was gone now that I'm reading it.
Do you read out loud to your wife?
I don't read out loud to my wife. I sometimes if I have like a really good, and again, it's usually a line, partly because like if I had a really good chapter, that would take a lot of time. I will kind of be like, hey, let me brag about what a good job I did at work. Which is funny also because, so my wife works on Capitol Hill. She works on a congressional committee. So her brags are like, we like dealt with this high stakes negotiation, or like we got this law passed. And I'm like, oh, well, I really had a good...
The man did cocaine with God. Yeah,
exactly. But I'll read stuff out loud to myself, right? And sometimes I'll start with that. And then also where I definitely... And it's interesting. I feel like every writer I talk to has a different relationship with their work and their partner, right? So like... I don't know, does your fiance read everything? Does she read nothing? How does it? Yeah,
she's a lawyer.
Okay.
So
mine too. All right.
She catches logical errors like nobody's business, because that's what lawyers are paid to do.
Yeah.
So she's like, you said that he was wearing a blue shirt here, and then it's like turquoise down here, and then so it's just like logical error, logical error. Logical
How do you
error.
plead? Yeah.
Yeah, and then exactly, and lawyers also can just eviscerate text like nobody's business. Like,
Yeah, that's exactly
just
right.
the amount of pages that lawyers have to read on a daily basis is quite impressive. So, I mean, yeah, she's a big reader. She also has a good sense of humor. So whether it be in the book or in ad campaigns, like if I come up with what I think is a clever joke for a
Yep.
script, I'll pitch her the joke, and I mean, it's not like she has to laugh, but it really does
helps,
help.
yeah.
I trust her taste.
Yeah.
Like I trust her taste, and that's as long. There have been points more recently where I think I've gotten annoying because it's like I'm getting the first load of my
Yeah.
books next week, and like up until that point, you're just making endless
Yep.
tiny edits. So there was a point where she's like, "Okay, you need to stop now."
Yeah.
I can like read back your book to you verbatim at this point.
Yep.
And I'm starting to hate it.
I feel like this is good for her to get used to before you get married, though, because then you will never, like, she knows this is her fault.
Yeah, totally. It's like, yeah, you know, if you're gonna marry a rock star, you're gonna have to deal with the groupies. If you're gonna marry a
Right.
writer, you got to deal with the bad jokes.
Yeah.
Again and again.
And I feel like some people who are married to writers be like, yeah, that seemed like a better trade, but
Yeah,
it turns out not.
yeah, not at all.
No, and the other, I think it's interesting actually, because I definitely relate to the, like, here's what you get when you marry a lawyer. And for me, what I've always found, Jackie's a good writer, but I wouldn't, like, it would be, I think, crossing a weird line if I was like, can you rewrite this for me, right? But what she's really, like, very, very, where I'm like, I'm sorry to have to bug you and ask you again, but I just trust you on this more than anyone else I know, is just to be like, yeah, no, this isn't working, right? Like, just a very good barometer
Yeah.
of, like, is this working? Is it not working? And 99% of the time, if she's like, yeah, this isn't working, she's right.
Yeah, you're like, I felt that in my body, but couldn't
Yeah,
articulate it, and
exactly.
I wanted it to work,
Right.
but it's not.
And
yeah,
now
totally.
I'll figure out how to fix it, but, like, I'm gonna have to admit there's a problem, which is often, again, you know, you write something, it's no matter what it is, right? It's personal. It's like a little part of you is on the page, so it can feel very like where you're like, well, how could I possibly let this go? And so you sometimes need someone else to be like, I don't know how you're gonna let it go, but you have to.
Yeah, this is something I heard Jerry Seinfeld say, and I try to implement it. I almost never do, but he says, if you come up with a clever joke, don't tell anyone for the day, because that warm little feeling that you got, if someone's like, no, then you're like, damn it, like you lose the feeling.
Yeah.
So to try and keep it at least for the day, and then the next day you can pitch it.
I kind of like that.
I don't follow it. What did it feel at all during your writing process like you were putting any relationships on the line?
It's a good question. I think a lot of things that I have done in my life, I have done and then looked back on and been like, oh, that was riskier than I thought, right? Like, I'm a fairly risk-averse person, which is, I think, a big part of what the book is about, of, like, I tend to be, I want to think through everything.
It's funny you say that, though, because you're a joke writer, and a joke is taking a risk.
Yeah, and I did stand-up comedy when I was 15. I grew up in New York City, and I started doing stand-up when I was in high school, and people would be like, that's so scary, and I was like, I guess so. Like, it wasn't that I was brave, I was just like, that particular fear gene, like, I had a bunch of other fear genes in that, or like that part of my brain, but that one, I was like, I don't know, it's like, it just seems like kind of fun and relatively natural. And so I think that's a little bit like, if Matt had hated this book, it would have definitely made Thanksgiving really weird for a very long time. I didn't think that he would, but I was also, it is a risk, right? And it's doubly a risk. This I didn't appreciate, actually. And he's like much more chill than I am in a variety of ways, including that I feel like there were a lot of people where you write about yourself and you kind of know that people on the internet are going to have thoughts. And, like, most of the thoughts, you're not going to be like, oh, that was really well thought out. Right? You're going to be like, okay, like, you know, great, thank you very much for that comment.
Yeah.
But like, the thing that made me really annoyed on the internet was when people, it didn't happen too much, thankfully, but if people were like mean or rude to him.
Sure.
Right? And so I think I was like, that I hadn't appreciated. Also, because my first book, which was similar in tone, because it was a memoir, was in 2017, and even then it was like social media was smaller still. right? I mean, a lot has changed in those 8 years.
Right. So it's less about you being afraid that Matt is going to be mad about something that you wrote, and more about, here's a guy who didn't necessarily sign up for the public spotlight, and now he's getting this attention that only like an author would get, so you feel protective over him.
Right. I mean, weirdly, so we did an interview together for CBS, which was really fun. It was actually like one of the things on my bucket list for the book was like, can we do something together?
Yeah.
It was in Asbury, and we got to take Michelle Miller, who's the host of CBS Saturday Morning. We got to take her out surfing at the Asbury Park Dog Beach. It was a cool time, and it was really nice to be able to get to do it with him. But it was also, I think, at some point during that process, it was like we were just talking about being on TV and like everybody's kind of role, quote unquote, in it. And somebody was like, Matt, it's cool. Like, you don't have to be polished on TV. You're a civilian, right? Like, I think that's probably the way that I would think about it. Is like, you know, if you
just don't say anything horrible and you'll be okay.
Well, right. And like, if you're in politics, if you put yourself out there with your writing or your comedy or your podcast or whatever, you're saying, hey, okay, internet, you know, full of famously kind and thoughtful people, like, feel free to judge.
It's a wonderful
right?
place.
And you're saying, all right, I'm going to take the good with the bad.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's important to get myself out there and say what I want to say. But if you're not doing that, then I think it's like you're kind of, then it's just a different story. So I was happy that, you know, that I think there were like a handful of, you know, whatever, mean people on Instagram.
But it wasn't
we'll all
too bad.
live. Yeah, but it wasn't. And there were also like a lot of really nice people, which helped balance things out, right? Including, I think there were a lot of people who were like, well, the other funny thing, and I did show Matt some of these, was there were a lot of kind of like more conservative readers or commentators who were like, you suck, but your brother-in-law seems cool. So
yeah.
All right,
You're like,
fair enough.
At least you bought the book.
Yeah, exactly.
So, when did you stop doing stand-up?
So I stopped doing stand-up in college. I was never like, you know.
You never wanted to do it professionally.
No, I don't think I had the guts, to be honest, to do it professionally when I was younger. To give you an example of how sort of little resilience I had when it came to stand-up, I did... I
bombed once and then I stopped.
It was pretty close. I did amateur nights in high school for a couple of years, and I would like go to clubs around the city, and, you know, or like talent shows in high school and like amateur nights in the city. And it was fun, and sometimes I did well, and sometimes I did not as well, but I like...
You're okay either way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I did a talent show at college when I first got to college my freshman year, and just bombed, like horribly bombed. And I was like, yeah, I don't think this is... I'm good. And I was doing improv at the time, and it was also nice to like do improv with other people.
Yep.
And so, and I think the uncertainty of stand-up, I don't know that I could have done it when I was in my 20s. Right?
The uncertainty professionally?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like that, I think, is the thing to me that's, you know, like the jokes and the writing and the...
Performing
and
even.
the fear of no one laughing. That stuff is scary, but I think I was just not wired in a way where I had enough confidence where I could be like, oh, this is not going well, but it will. I know it will.
Right.
That's a lot of...
And I'm going to keep traveling around the country for no money until it starts going well. Yeah.
And I really admire, like, I know stand-ups and now, and I really admire the people who can do that, not just the jokes, but the kind of mental toughness that it takes to keep it going.
Did you felt like you had a knack for speech writing early? Like, was that where you found the earliest, like, oh, I'm good at this. I can leverage this part of it.
Well, so I caught the Obama bug in 2008, right? So I heard him speak, just like was watching CNN, and then was like, whatever that guy's doing, I want to do that.
Yeah.
Never thought I would be a speechwriter, but I was a field organizer in Ohio, moved to D.C. without any plan whatsoever. I was like, hope and change. That was the plan. And I, through a friend's brother, he helped me get like an internship at a speechwriting firm. And actually what happened first, so my friend's brother was John Kerry's speechwriter at the time when John Kerry was in the Senate. And I sat down for coffee with him, and he was like, oh, one of our interns fucked something up, a blog post. you want to try it? Because it was a weekend and he didn't want to work over the weekend. And so he was like, why don't you do it over the
Sure.
weekend? And hopefully it makes my life easier. So I spent all weekend on it and I sent it to him and he was like, oh, this is really good. And they basically just used that. And then he was like, don't intern in the Senate. We have bad internships. Go intern at this firm. I had no idea there were speechwriting firms. And the people there were also super supportive, and that turned into a job. And then that turned into them helping me get a job at the White House. And so I do think that, like, you know, that was the first thing, certainly the first thing when I was at least somewhat of an adult, where the universe was like, yeah, no, you can
Do this.
You can skip some steps.
Yeah.
if you do this.
Yeah. Like I always find it interesting when someone finds a talent. That's a good way to put it, where you get to skip steps.
Yeah.
Where it's like, cool, you can come to the front of the line.
Yep.
Like comedians who like start and are good immediately.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, I had like a manager within the first year, and then I was I listened to a podcast with Nick Schwartz on Neil Brennan's podcast. I don't know if you ever listen to that. It's awesome. And he's like, I was good the first time I did it. Like, he's like, I was the only thing I've ever done where it was like people were like,
sometimes you
holy
just have
shit,
that.
you just have that talent. John Florence surfing.
Right.
Like that dude was meant to be on a surfboard
Yeah.
from the time he was 3 years old.
Well, and I think for me, it's interesting. I'm definitely like, you know, again, I feel like more than any book interview I've ever done, I keep talking down my own book. I'm like, well, I'm an okay book writer. I'm like, I think this is a good book. But I also am like, I do think that when I kind of think about like, I still think that as a speechwriter, like sort of wins above replacement. I'm probably better than I am an author.
Right.
But I also then am kind of like, what is the stuff I enjoy most? And that's, you know, those are also questions. But definitely when I think when you're in your like 20s and figuring it out, finding the thing where the universe, rightly or wrongly, right? It might be totally incorrect, might be unfair, says you're really good at this. It definitely helps.
Yes.
Makes a big difference.
Yeah, well, it gives you confidence.
Yeah.
Like finding a thing that you're good at to give you early confidence can transfer to other things
100%.
to the rest of your life, right? Like you can, if you get signal from society that you're good at something early, it does something where you're like, well, maybe I could do this other thing too.
Yeah.
And then you're like, well, that's way harder than I thought it would be. But
right.
but had I not had the confidence to try,
Yeah, you give it a shot.
I never would have.
The other thing I always feel is like, I feel this now when I'm kind of on the opposite side, right? Where sometimes people will send me some stuff, speech writing or a script or a book or whatever from a young person. And again, it's a matter of taste. But if I read something and I just think like, holy shit, this is great, right? Like it's really different and cool, and like this person has it, whatever that is, then I start to want to help them.
Yeah.
As opposed to them asking me for a favor. And so much of starting a career is just like shamelessly asking people for favors and feeling terrible about it.
Right.
But if you have a moment where someone says, no, actually, like, it's kind of, this is cool, I want to help you.
Yeah.
Then it turns out they can often do a lot more.
Yeah, when doors start opening unexpectedly.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that one of the hardest things is when you have a childhood dream but you're not actually that good at the thing, but you're working really hard to do the thing, but then you get this signal over here that like, hey, actually you should be a speechwriter.
That's
not
interesting.
a pro surfer or not a this or that.
Yeah.
But like childhood dreams are the dreams of children, right? And we can hold on to those dreams way too long and not pick up the radio signal that we should be, where we can have way more success in this other avenue. But it takes listening, and it takes like a certain amount of humility to actually go with that current.
Yeah, and I also think it depends, because sometimes you'll hear people say like, I always dreamed of being, you know, I was listening to an interview that Sarah Sherman from SNL did recently, and she was like, I always dreamed of being a comedian, and now I'm on SNL, right?
Yeah.
Like, and she's really good on SNL. She's really funny. So I do think sometimes it's, you know, it's like there's no one path, but I do think that it is also like it's a mix of factors.
Yeah.
Right? And I definitely think that, I mean, I remember when I took a speechwriting job at this firm, I was like, I'm not even selling out, because I wasn't making like selling out money, but I was like, am I giving up on like the chance to write at the White House, right? Or like to do something in politics? And I remember thinking, and it turned out I was right about this, that like, if I do this and I'm good at it, then other things will open up.
Totally.
And so some of those chances might come back. Whereas if I spend 2 years and I do something else and I'm not as good at it, then I don't know that those doors are going to open.
Totally. I mean, that is one of those things, right, where society rewards like talent, period, right? Like if you're a famous NBA basketball player, you then get to start a brand afterwards.
Yeah.
You then get to get pretty much anyone on the phone because society has said, well, you're really good at that thing. Like we reward you for having gotten to that place. And for you, it's like, you're Obama's speechwriter. Like, holy shit, right? Like that business card.
It definitely helps.
Really helps for
you
you to then go do something that you may not be as naturally talented at.
I do think the one difference is like we are living in a world where if you have fame, you're a media company, right? So if you're because I've worked with athletes too, right? And it is interesting. They're media companies as well as people. Mm-hmm. If you're a celebrity, you're a media company. And so once you have that, then people kind of say, great, we don't know how to get anyone's attention anymore. So that's another, right? If you're a really fantastic poet, right?
Yeah.
Like people aren't necessarily like, now you're a brand, here's a clothing deal. But it's still like, I do think that there's also just like, there's a joy in watching people do the thing that it feels like they're just really...
They should be doing. Yeah.
You know, I mean, this is sort of a tangent, but you were talking about being a comedy fan, so I'm going to indulge. So I was in college, and I did improv in college with my friend Claire Mullaney, who's John Mulaney's younger sister. And Claire is absolutely hilarious, and we actually, years later, wrote a pilot together that didn't go anywhere, but it was really fun. That's not the point. When we were still in college and we were in the city for the summer, we each had different internships, and she got a bunch of our friends together, and she was like, can you come see my brother's stand-up show at the Pitt Theater in New York? And we were like, oh fuck, we gotta go see your older brother's stand-up. Like this, no one has a good night seeing their friend's older brother stand-up. But we were like, okay, we like Claire, we'll go. And I just remember sitting there and being like, holy shit, like this, at the time he was maybe 24, so I was like, this is an old person, but not that old person,
and unbelievably good,
and just so good, and so it was like, and also it was, actually, I just finished a book called Changeover about men's tennis, and it had a line which I really loved. It was talking about Jannik Sinner and Carlos Alcaraz, 1 and 2 in the world. And it said, I think it was said, that Sinner had all the qualities that a scout would look for, and Alcaraz had all the qualities that scouts didn't even think to look for because no one had them yet. And it was that. It was like watching somebody where it's like, oh, you are doing something perfectly, and also no one quite knew what it was yet, right? You're doing your thing.
Right.
And you're the best at it.
Finding those things. So I have a funny story that I wrote down I wanted to tell you. When I was like 24, I was doing environmental documentaries, and I got to interview Van Jones. Mm-hmm. And the interview was about nuclear power, and then after the interview, I basically just kept the camera recording. I'm like, dude, how do you speak? Like, how do you give a speech the way that you do? Yeah. And he dude, it was like a switch flipped in his mind, because he was talking about environmentalism. He was talking about, race issues. And he had all those talking points that he was knocking out of the park for the interview. But then the second I asked him about the craft of public speaking, it was like his eyes shifted. And it was like, oh, this is what you're actually focused on all the time. Yeah. Right? Like, it is the craft of delivering these messages. And he's talked about effective pausing to paint the picture in someone's mind, tell the story of the audience, tell the story of yourself, tell the story of the change you're trying to make. It was crazy how nuanced and fast he was when it came to deconstructing what a speech is.
Well, right. People, and I think that's true in general, right? A lot of people think a ton about craft, so they love to talk about craft. And, I think this is true with musicians. I also think it's true for surfers, actually. It's a weird thing with this book, because I write I've now been surfing for 4 years. So, and I started at 35. I'm not a natural talent at it. I'm okay, but very okay.
Extremely okay.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say I'm extremely okay. Yeah. I'm like a beginner intermediate surfer. but I've gotten, because of the book, to talk to some really good surfers, which has been interesting. And I do feel like people just really like to talk about like the details and the technique and all of the things that go on that you don't see.
Yeah.
Because that's what people are thinking about all the time, right? Like, I mean, I assume this, I haven't like spent a lot of time with big wave surfers, but I assume this is true if like you're talking with other big wave surfers.
Oh, dude.
There's got to be a language that like you speak.
I
that
started this
yeah.
podcast to ask big wave surfers about the craft so
Yeah.
I could get better at it.
Yeah.
Like that was the primary, it was like selfishly.
Smart.
Like, can I ask you an hour and a half of questions about where to sit exactly in the bowl at Mavericks? And like things like when you're surfing a really big wave, one of the things that happens is you get caught at the top of the lip because the wave is moving faster, right? So you need to point yourself to the bottom of the wave, like literally look at the bottom of the wave and try and get there when you're paddling down the face of it. Because if you get up at the top, you're going to start fluttering, wind gets under your board and you're fucked, right? So like things like that are so tactical about like literally where to be looking as you're paddling on a wave. It changes the game.
Well, let me ask, as a not great surfer, because I feel like that happens to me too. Is it the same thing that's happening, but it's a different? It's like because there's a different skill level, or is it like this is actually a totally different thing?
It's the same concept, right?
Okay.
That you as someone, you're basically not paddling fast enough for the wave.
And that's why you're getting hung up.
Yeah,
on the
you're not
lip.
paddling fast enough, but you're also not looking in the right place.
Yeah.
Right? If you're paddling down the face of a wave and you're kind of just like looking ahead, lackadaisically, you will get caught at the top. But if it's a 30-foot wave, you really need to be paddling hard and you need to look at the bottom of like, I'm going to make it down there.
Wow,
right now.
okay.
Like I'm going to make it to the bottom spot and then you're pushing as hard down as you can to commit. And I mean, there was a couple of years where like, I was just falling way more than I should have because I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's all technique. And I think with surfing in particular, it's just such a hard sport. Like it's just, there's no two ways about it.
No,
like
I know.
you can do it for your whole life. And because it's a changing playing field, it's just really difficult. Like I grew up skateboarding. We had a half pipe in our backyard and I can still go 6 months without getting on a skateboard.
Right.
And come right back and be like, I'm not learning new tricks, but I'm basically there.
Yeah.
Surfing, if I don't surf for 2 weeks, it takes 3 days to get back to that level of like, okay, I'm in rhythm with the ocean again. Because so much of surfing isn't about standing on the wave, it's about reading the ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was before I got here and we started talking. So I was in. We talked a little bit about this off mic. I was in La Jolla and then went up through San Clemente. So I stopped at a couple of spots. And in both of them, I had the exact same feeling I always have at a new spot, which is like, why do I suck even more than I thought I did? And it is like, I was like, actually, all of the mechanics I was pretty happy with today for, again, my level, but still, I was like, I can handle waves this size, like I'm popping up fine. It was the feeling of like, I just don't know how to read this wave. Like I know sort of how to read a wave in New Jersey, right?
Yeah.
Like I've just, there's a set of waves that I've surfed over
more and more.
Yeah, and so they look the same and you take the same cues. And it is so challenging and it's interesting because as somebody or like for, I'd watch someone surf maybe on TV or something, never occurred to me that was also part of what's going on, right? Not just the mechanics of like, oh, this person is getting up and they're on their rail and they're turning at the top and then they're going to the bottom. But they're also doing this in concert with this thing that's constantly moving and changing. Yeah.
It's I hadn't thought about this until now, but because I didn't know that you said that writing books is not necessarily the second nature skill to you that speech writing is, and how much of the book, like really, I mean, one of the points that I really liked in the book was just. It sounds cliche to say it as I say it now, but just like really embracing something that you are not good at and moving through that. Because especially in your 30s, it's so common to just lean on what you're good at
Yeah.
and comfortable with, and as a result, your world starts to constrict.
Yeah.
Right? Like you get an ego in that thing. You surround yourself with people who are like, "Oh, she's the man at that thing," right?
Yeah.
And as much Instagram inspiration memes that we have about like failure is just a way to move forward
Right.
and embrace
Which sometimes it is.
sometimes
failure
it just fucking
sucks. Yeah.
sucks. Yeah. Sometimes you're just like, God damn it. I
Yeah.
was both embarrassing and didn't
Yeah.
I don't know that I'm getting any better. Right.
There's a Nora Ephron quote that I love where she said, people say that like flops, when she was talking about screenwriting, and she was like, flops, like every flop makes you stronger, every failure makes you stronger. She's like, the main thing I learned about flops is that it's possible to have a flop. And
Right.
So it's just bad. Right?
And you can learn a lot through success too.
Yeah.
Like
it's more fun.
It's more fun. You gain more confidence to go do more things, right? Like it's what we talked about earlier. Like you need the confidence. You need enough confidence to go do something that you suck at. Right.
That's right. I think the other thing how old are you?
35.
35. Okay, yeah. You seemed like a handful of years younger than me. I'm 39 next week. Or maybe last week, depending on when this podcast comes out. Yeah, 6 years ago. Who knows?
My intro will be 6 years long.
That's right. So I feel like I am at an age, and maybe I'll look back on this and be like, that was ridiculous. But I feel like I'm at an age where you sort of wonder when you're young, you're like, how do people sometimes close off their lives without meaning to?
Yeah.
Right? When you look at people who are like, I would say older than we are, but not that many. Like
yeah,
a decade
you're like,
or
how
two
did that
older.
happen? And then you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I see
Like,
it.
how did you go from having like a big life to a small life, and you didn't? Some people want that, and that's great. But it could happen by accident.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, oh, I get how that can happen and it's not entirely a bad thing. It's like you put so much work into being good at stuff that to then and also like when you're 25 and you embarrass yourself. You're like, great, that's my job, right?
Yeah.
To some extent. I mean, not if you're in the army.
Right. But 20s is full of failure. Like relationship failures, job failures. Like you're figuring out. You're like, I picture your 20s. You're like the baby deer that like is still just stumbling around.
Yes, which I think is doubly funny because like I don't know, my grandfather fought in World War II, like a lot of people's grandfathers. Right, he was 16, I think, when he signed up. I think he like cheated his way in so he could sign up early.
Saving the country.
Yeah.
What did you do? I was on TikTok.
Yeah, I was like screwing stuff up. Mostly. But I do think that there's just more than that. It's like society is like, okay, you're figuring it out.
Yeah.
Especially if you're lucky enough to like, I always felt like going to like a fancy pants college.
Yeah.
That's like the real benefit of fancy pants college, right? Is that you can screw stuff up for a while in your 20s and people are like, oh, you're just finding yourself.
Yep.
Because they just assume good things about you.
Yes.
At a certain point, that stops being true.
Yeah. It changes in your 30s where they're like, man, like Mark really still can't figure it out, can he?
Then I do think it's different. And I also think, and I think it's really scary. And so if you're like, I did all that work, I got through that scary phase where I was like, am I going to feel really good at something? Am I going to feel like I know who I am? And now to try to like step outside that again, it can be really frightening.
You strike me as someone who has a really solid work ethic and can deduce a skill down to like you strike me as being tenacious. Like you're like, I'm gonna figure this out. I will and I think that is maybe the difference of people that have a really hard time with things for a long time versus people who have a hard time with things for a little time is like there is an art of learning, right? And it once you figure out what that art is, you can kind of become more familiar with the suck phase of it, right? You're like, okay, I'm in this phase. It's going to suck for another 6 months, and then something's going to click. But if I keep doing it consistently, it's gonna shift for me. Like, do you tell me? Is that true? Like, do you feel like you have a tenacious learning ability? Did that come to you from an early age?
I think it depends on the thing, right? Like, if I care about something, then
go
I'm
for
very
it.
good at sticking with it. And if I don't know if I care, I'm very good at being like, ooh, what's the next shiny object, right? Like, because I mean, right now, for example, I'm kind of between writing projects. And I am fighting myself to be like, you got to pick something and just write it, right? Like, you got to start a thing and finish that thing.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yeah, but what if I'm like, what if I did? I mean, it's like I know I'm in that place because I'm like, I don't know, like, what if I did a puppet show?
Right.
Like, just, like, crazy
There's a million
ideas
things
that are terrible. And it's because the appeal of like the new thing that could be the best puppet show in history, right? So I don't have to confront what it is yet.
Right.
But once I sink into something, then I do feel like I'm pretty good at seeing it through. The other piece of it, I feel really lucky to have worked in politics first, right? Like because we were talking about our 20s and like screwing up, and that's true. But also I was at the White House from like 24 to 29. And so that was a job where I was like, I am not grown up. They should have a grown up.
Yeah.
But it was
someone's gonna like just tap you on the shoulder and ask you to
100%.
ask you to leave
Yeah,
at
you're like,
any
why
point.
am I doing
Yeah.
Like they should have hired somebody. Like I wasn't not confident, but it's just like there's 300 million people in America. Like adults. Like there's got to be someone who's better at this than I am. And I think there was. I do think that like. In politics, you really learn to work hard. Sometimes it can be almost like a problem and a little addictive for people in politics of just like workaholism becomes a way of life. But you learn, it's like I have talked to people in other industries. People say they work hard.
Yeah.
Nobody I know works as hard as people who are on political campaigns or like I can't speak to like every White House.
Sure.
But like when I was at the White House, people just worked harder than any other group of people I've come across.
Yeah.
And so everything else is easier than that in terms of
and people in California don't work as hard as people in New York.
when they have more fun.
Yeah. But there are culturally
Yes.
there are norms that like I've worked with New York startups versus California startups, and it's like there is a different culture here that is very real, and it's more just like no bullshit, like we're gonna fucking it's whereas California's we love our feelings.
Yeah. No, I do. And I think for me I had to kind of learn, right? And part of the book is really like learning how to have fun, right? Like I keep thinking about this because there's that, on Instagram, right? There's a lot of like it's okay to not be okay, which is true. But I also feel like I struggle with like it's okay to be okay. Right? Like to be like the world is a fucking weird place, but also right now I'm like out in the ocean and like the waves are great. And both of those things are true, and I can enjoy the good one even as I'm like without totally checking out from the world, but just to be like, hey, this is awesome, right? Like that's a good feeling.
What is a typical writing session look like for you? Like duration, distraction, like I know some writers who can like you can have Slack open and be like checking email while then also writing the articles. I know some people that need to write by hand because those distractions are so destructive for productivity. Like you're a productive person. You're getting a lot of words out and completing a lot of things. What does that day look like for you?
For me,
and you're on tour right now, so I know it's like
so it
a bit
depends
different.
on what part of a book that I'm in.
Yeah, but if you're at home,
so if I'm at home and I'm like working on a book, I usually and I know what I more or less what I want to write. I just haven't written it yet. I usually will say like, okay, I want to do a chapter every 2 weeks on a first draft, and that's usually like a week of writing it. And I tend to write 6,000 word chapters roughly. Sometimes, sometimes not, but usually around 6,000 words. So if I can write if I can do a first draft on week 1 and then week 2 go back over it and like kind of do a first rewrite of it, then I'll be on that schedule. And usually that's like 4 or 5 hours of writing a day, right? Like after that you start to burn out, or at least I start to burn out a little bit. And I'm definitely not for that. I usually need to like, I use a program called Freedom, which you may have come across, right? Just to block all of the things to be like, hey, I wonder what's on CNN. Right? Like the moment I don't know how the sentence starts. Yeah, exactly. Like, how are the waves in Jersey?
So Freedom cuts off your internet, right? For that period of time.
You can kind of be selective about which.
And are you just writing on a Word doc?
Yeah, I just write on Word,
Google Docs or whatever.
Yeah,
but not on the internet. So you're not on the internet, and you're sitting down for 4 or 5 hours.
I can't be on the parts of the internet. Like I could check email periodically if I need to that day or whatever. But but I can't like be like, well, I need to check, all of social media plus YouTube between
Right.
sentences, which is otherwise what I will do. But then when I'm rewriting, we've been talking. It's interesting, this conversation, because I think to me a theme of it is that kind of like, what are you really naturally like inclined toward?
Yeah.
And for me, I'm a good writer, but I'm a very good self-editor. And so once I have something done and I'm like, this is not good, but it will be good.
Yeah.
Then that's where I can kind of get lost in it, and I can be like, oh, a whole day passed and I didn't really notice because I was rewriting, right? Like that, and that feels much more natural, where I don't have to like force myself to not procrastinate, right?
Sure.
It's like once I get into the rewriting process, then I feel really like I'm in.
You're in the zone.
In the zone.
You're in the zone.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, how good you are as an editor determines how good you are as a writer.
I think that's true, but I think all writers are able to edit themselves because it's just part of the job. I think some people like kind of love that first draft, like this, especially people who just like, they love the freedom of like a vomit draft.
Yeah.
Right. I can't enjoy it in that way.
It's like grind. You're
it
like
feels like work
going
like,
uphill, shoveling snow.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then, and the other thing too, and I think it is a real strength of mine as a writer, and I think you don't need it as a writer again, but it's helpful to have it, is that I have a pretty good sense. If I'm like, this is good, it's usually good. And if I'm
Right.
like, this sucks, it usually sucks. So sometimes that's actually really bad, because if I write something and it sucks, I know,
Right.
which can be bad. But at least I have the confidence where I'm like, oh, I think this is good. Usually I'm right, and so these are all matters of taste and whatever. But within that,
Yeah. But
with
there
that
is
caveat.
grandiosity that can be it can be blinding to
yeah,
you.
and
right?
you don't
If
have
you're-
to second guess yourself.
Yeah. Exactly. And
And
that's
I think that's nice.
I'll keep name dropping here because
let's do it.
I want you to like me. I interviewed Matt Taibbi once, and he said we were talking about writing, and he was talking about how he used to write on drugs a lot.
Yes.
And he said the thing about writing on uppers is that you lose the second guessing part of yourself, which is really important for an editor. As the editor, you need to be like, yeah, this is awesome, and then like, it's not so awesome, and you lose that when you're on uppers.
I have to say, I think if you were to drop a name to get me to like you, I'm not sure Matt Taibbi.
Yeah, damn it. Yeah,
but it's okay. I think
prolific.
Yeah,
He's a prolific
He's
writer.
certainly prolific. I will give him credit for that. I think, but I it's funny. I've just never been like a alcohol or drugs while writing guy. Not out of like a matter of principle, but just because I'm like, like every 6 months I'll be like, I bet if I like had opened a bottle of wine and got writing, it would go really well. And then that's a nice reminder to myself of like, no, it wouldn't. It would go very poorly. Just because everything slows down and like you're not as sharp.
And then when you have a client, like a speechwriting client, how does that fit into your day?
So it kind of depends on the day, right? Sometimes that is the day. And then sometimes it's, it's saying, okay, I'll do like one thing on nights and weekends and one thing in the weekday. I don't have like a sort of, I have to have a rigid schedule. Every day has to look the same in order for stuff to work. Which is good because I tend to do a bunch of different types of things. I do think, when I'm in like the thick of it with a book, I have tried in the past sometimes to be like, oh, I'll try to be there for my client work and also for fit the last 2 weeks of editing a book. And like, I have learned the hard way that doesn't work. And you have to just be like, I'm going to block out this time for myself. But when I'm not on deadline like that, it's usually saying, all right, well, Tuesday is going to be a day where I wrap up that speech. And then on Wednesday, I'm going to, do a little bit more on that chapter than I would have otherwise done.
And are these mostly inbound requests? Like you said, you work with athletes, you work with politicians. Like bring me into that world a little bit.
Well, for the most part. I mean, it's a very fortunate thing where like, if you write speeches for a president, generally speaking, then people are often like, would you like to write, are you around? Would you be interested in writing this? So I've done, like I never like started my own company or whatever, like a firm.
Okay, so it's just
for
you.
that. It's just me. But I've been really lucky. I write, and usually these are like confidential things, so I can't go that into it. But the people who I've worked for, especially the people who I've done like
Andrew
consistent,
Tate.
yeah, exactly. everything,
love the
everything
work
he
you've done.
says, that's just 100% me. Yeah. No, I feel like I've been really lucky where I learn a lot from I don't have a ton of clients these days, just like 2 or 3, and they tend to be people. And these are people I've worked with for a while, and they're people where I feel like I learn a lot from them, and I think that's really like that is very lucky. Where I'm like, oh, it's a totally different part of my brain, but I can like be doing work for someone while still being like, oh, this is totally fascinating, and I'm learning a lot.
Right, because you're getting to know them better. It's not just a one-off where you kind of need to like, okay, I've never heard of you. I need to learn about you right now. Like you're going deeper and deeper into their their arc, and every speech you're writing, you're helping like further that message.
Well, and a little bit actually, like you were talking about with this podcast. So you're like, I get to interview interesting people and find out what their lives are like.
Yeah.
Right. So a huge part for me, a huge part of speech writing is just asking questions, being curious, because the audience is curious. And so, if you're talking to, like, let's say the CEO of a big company, right? I've never been the CEO of a big company. I think it's vanishingly unlikely that I ever will. But I'm like, what is that like, right? What did you learn from, how do you do your job? What do you learn from it? How does who you are affect how you do what you do, right? All of these different questions that aren't really unlike what we're talking about, but with an eye toward then turning it into something that is in their voice down the road.
Do you find that a big part of your job is just to get them out of vagary and into like a story, into bringing people into that? I find that the problem with most speeches is that people are just, and the problem with a lot of just communication generally is that people forget to tell the story.
It depends on the person, right? I think some people are kind of natural communicators and they love jumping in with a story. Sometimes definitely there's a lot of saying like, that's a really interesting idea. What's the moment when you realized it, or what's the moment that you feel like, you didn't live up to that? And
right. So you're trying to get people into a moment.
Yeah. Sometimes you can do that. But I also think with speeches, it depends on the speech, but I will say the biggest reason most boring speeches are boring is that the person giving the speech didn't know what they wanted to say. So that's the hardest. It's not the hardest thing in that, again, I'm lucky with who I get to work for, and so I don't worry, like, they do have things to say.
Right.
But actually, let me flip it around. I don't do a ton of public speaking, but when I have, because I make all the same mistakes that speakers do, even though I've worked on the other end of it a lot, is if you sit down and you say, all right, what do I want to say? Almost always that ends poorly. If you say, like, what do I want the world to look like after I'm done? Then you start to say, all right, what's the point of this, right? And so much of like 80% of the work really is being like, do I know what the point of this is? And then the interesting stuff flows usually, because if somebody has an interesting life and they know exactly what they want to say, then you can combine those and it'll present itself.
I like the prompt of what do you want the world to look like when you're done too, because it sort of gets people out of their own heads. Yeah. Right? The big fear if you're a public speaker is like, will they like me? What if they hate me? But if you can craft it in such a way that they then see themselves as a vessel for the idea. Yes. It gets them out of their own way. So I like when you said that too. You did the pen thing. You unknowingly did the pen.
I didn't know.
Anytime someone says change the world, they need to do the pen. You got to do the pen thing.
So it's interesting. So there's two ways of talking about the same idea that I also think are good. Well, so the one that I would say, this is actually the same way, but when I was at the White House and we would have like a meeting before the speech, right? With you bring in the policy people and all of the kind of, the stakeholders who they have something invested in what the president's going to say. That question of what do we want the world to look like after the speech, if everyone agrees on that, it becomes a lot easier to know what you're allowed to cut later on, right? Because then if you say, okay, what we want is, we know that we want the headline to be whatever, like
A kitten for everyone.
Yeah, kitten for everyone. And then somebody is like, yeah, but what about puppies? You're like, yeah, but that's not a kitten for everyone, right? It's a great idea. We love puppies. Doesn't mean puppies are bad or that like you were wrong to bring up puppies, but this is a speech about free kittens, right? So let's take out the puppy thing.
So you agree on the platform.
The platform and and I think the change you agree on what the end is that the speech is a means for. So if the speech is an end and not an end unto itself, you can justify anything, right? If you're like, the whole point of the speech is to write a speech, you're like, I got a great idea, put it in there.
Right.
Where the hard thing is taking stuff out.
Yeah.
And so if the speech is a means to an end, you say, well, is that going to actually accomplish what we want, including that line? Like,
what's a real example? I know that you need to be confidential with something, but what might a real example of a CEO who's giving a speech?
Well, here's a good example. So, let me think about this. Because it's been a long time since I wrote speeches for the White House, but those are the ones that are the most public. Actually, yeah. So often, like, let me think about with the CEO. I hope you're going to edit this because there's a lot of thinking.
It's okay. This guy's a thinker. This is hey everyone. Yeah. This is the job.
That's right.
This guy. This
just
is what he gets
into
paid
a microphone
for.
repeatedly.
Yeah. Those calories are burning.
That's
right.
Right. So for example, let's say if you're a CEO, right, and you are talking about like where you want the company to go in a year. Actually, let's talk about with stories, right? You were talking about stories. Sometimes a story, if you say, okay, and this is all too vague to be like, I don't know, come back to me in a week and I'll have a really better example.
Sure.
But if you say, this is a speech about saying, we want to I'm just gonna pick something at random, right? We want to embrace AI. That's the big thing, right? I'm sure there's a gazillion CEOs writing that speech or CEO speechwriters writing that speech right now. And this speech is going to be about embracing AI. If you have a story about, and the idea is like, because we have to change to keep up. I'm already working on the most boring speech on the planet, but like we have to, like
keep up with it where the times are headed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you have a story, right? It's often like saying, is that a story where the moral is you have to change or, or you'll be overrun? Or is that just a cool story, right? Like, if and I am very aware that this was a terribly boring answer to your question.
Yeah, but you need to have it all serve the big.
Yes.
Like you can keep asking yourself the question: does this serve the big idea? Does it serve the big idea?
I had a writing teacher in college named Ann Fadiman, who's a fantastic teacher, and she would always use like a popsicle stick joke, which is how did Michelangelo carve his statue of David? And the answer is it was easy. He took a big block of marble and got rid of everything that didn't look like David, right? And she would ask when we were writing, it was a class on personal essays, but it was true for anything like that, where she would say, well, what's your David, right? Like, what is the thing that you're trying to do? And then if it's not that, you have to get rid of it. And so I think that's the, even in the sense of like, when I was at the White House, sometimes we'd work on a housing speech and somebody would say, yeah, but also this week we just announced this really cool initiative to like help people pay back their student loans, right? And can we get that in there? And sometimes the answer is yes, and there's internal politics and whatever. But the speechwriter's job at least is to be the person who's like, no, like what if we left it out, right? Because otherwise everyone in the room is trying to add. The speechwriter is the only person who has any sort of like incentives to take out. And so it's often saying, yeah, that's a really cool initiative, but it's actually, people aren't going to remember two things, so let's stick with the thing and make sure that it's memorable.
Do you feel comfortable being a naysayer to a powerful person? Has that always been the case? Like did you ever have to tell Obama no?
It's interesting because I when I left the White House, I had a colleague of mine was like, you have this superpower because no matter what room you walk into for the rest of your life, you can be like, I've had to go into the Oval Office and tell the President of the United States that he's wrong. And like, and you've done that. So you can go into any room and say whatever you think you need to say. I was like, yeah, but I never had to do that. not because, by the way, like things were really wrong and I didn't.
Because he was so good at giving speeches.
Yeah, well, it was also, I was a junior speechwriter, so maybe the chief speechwriter sometimes had those conversations. I did have to tell President Obama once that he looked like Hitler in a slide, and that's why we had to take it out of a Correspondents Dinner monologue that he was doing, which was very scary, but he thought it was really funny. So
love that.
And I do think he was like, he was good, and I've noticed this with a lot of like important people who I admire. He was good at giving people permission to tell him what they really thought. Right.
Right.
Like, I think that's something I have learned just from working for people, is that you can't just assume that, like, let's see who will tell me, who will be honest, or like push back when I need it.
Yep.
You have to be like, it is your job to tell me. And actually, when I've worked with people and, hired people to do different things, I try to do the same thing, where I will say, I want you to tell me what you think.
Yep.
And I will be annoyed if you don't tell me what you think, but I won't be annoyed if you actually share your opinion.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, that there are two different kinds of people. It's like the ones that welcome that feedback and the ones that don't.
Yeah.
It's really hard to give feedback to the ones that don't.
Yeah, because they don't want it, right? And like ultimately it's their, especially for speechwriters, by
Yeah.
the way, because it is theirs. So it's,
it's their kittens to give away.
Exactly. Well, right, and it's like whether this is a friend of mine, the guy who got me into speechwriting in the first place, actually. He told me the thing about speechwriting is if you and your boss disagree, your boss is right. Right? So, which is very different than if you're like, don't attack that country, it's going to be a disaster, and the president says, nah, I'm going to do it anyway. Right? Like, that could be a bad decision. With speeches, it's more complicated, right? Because ultimately, it's just theirs. It is really, it's more subjective.
How?
There are sometimes, except for factual stuff, I will say. There were moments when I had to say, the fact checker said, that line you liked, it's got to go.
Yeah. There aren't enough kittens for everyone.
Yeah, exactly.
We can't say that
Like,
everyone
that's
gets
not-
a kitten.
Yeah.
Only the children. It seems to me, and you're way more in this world than I am, but I want to get your point of view on this, that Trump's superpower is that people believe that he is saying what he thinks. Like, for all the crazy shit he says, you get the sense that he's going off the cuff and he actually believes all that stuff.
Yeah.
And what has lost so many people to Trumpism and is that feeling that if you're a politician, politicians aren't actually telling you what they think. Right? So how do you grapple with that, right? Where there are certain politicians where you get the sense that it is canned, and there are certain politicians where you get the sense like, that's actually what he or she thinks.
Yeah.
Are you able to have those kinds of conversations with them? Like, hey, this is it. What you're saying sounds good, but I don't believe you.
So I think Trump, weirdly, in certain ways, is a very conventional politician, but has real skill, in real political skill. In that, I think he's probably the most poll-driven politician in like my lifetime, certainly that I can remember. Because basically, if his base likes something, he will do it. He's not always polling Americans, especially now that he feels like he's in charge, and he's like, "Am I a king? Let's find out." Right? That's different. But but he's very attuned to what his base thinks, and he lets them lead him. Right? And usually, if somebody agrees with you, you're like, that's so authentic. And if they disagree with you, you're like, I don't know about that. So I think that's part of where I think that a lot of, not just Democrats, but a lot of Democrats and other politicians struggle is they don't seem comfortable in their own skin. Right? Trump, in a weird way, because he I think it's just a matter of record, right? He lies a lot. He says, like, he'll say one thing on Monday and he'll say the opposite thing on Tuesday with equal conviction. But he does seem oddly comfortable being himself. Where, and I think in that sense, right, if you look at the president, like, I think Biden, because of his age, is almost like a little bit of an anomaly, right? Like, I think when he ran in 2020, it was different. But if you look at Obama and Clinton, right, the other previous two-term presidents, they obviously don't agree with Trump on a lot of stuff. They're very different from Trump in a lot of ways. They have the same sense of they're comfortable in their own skin. And I think sometimes that lack of authenticity is a discomfort with oneself and not knowing what you want. And that, I think, you can't, as a speechwriter, and I have tried at times, I will tell you from experience, it is very hard
to
change someone.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like, nobody, and
You
especially...
excuse me, sir, you look fundamentally uncomfortable in your own skin.
Right.
Can you...
And I also was very fortunate where with President Obama, that wasn't an issue, right? It was
Right.
almost the opposite, where it was like, how are you so good at this? And I'm not just saying that because I worked for him, right? I was like genuinely, regularly quite impressed
Right.
with his...
once-in-a-generation talent.
Absolutely. And sometimes you work with people and then you think, oh, well... And the other thing I will say is, if you're a speechwriter, you're not working with someone who's like, how do I make it, right? You're working with someone who already has been wildly improbably successful. So to then come in, and I do understand this, to then come in and say, you have achieved extraordinary things, far more extraordinary than being your speechwriter.
Yeah.
And now I want to suggest how you should change all the things that got you here.
Yeah.
Because I know best. You could see why people might not react so well to that. So I also think that's the other piece of it. I think sometimes it's a relationship thing, right?
Right.
If you've worked with someone for years and years, sure. But if you kind of parachute in, it's different.
I heard recently the definition of charisma isn't, do I like that person? It's, does that person like me?
Yeah, I think that's true. And, the other thing, I remember this feeling when I used to go to, I went to a couple of Obama speeches in 2008, right? And he was really good. But more than that, it was this, the audience was, it was like we were.
We were good. Yeah. He was good, but we were great.
Yeah, this sense,
Right.
he kind of summoned something in a crowd of people. And that was a really cool feeling.
I bet.
And, I also think charisma works differently in different types of people, right? Like, I've never met Bill Clinton. Maybe I've, shaken his hand once, I don't know. But I've never, talked with Bill Clinton. But I've definitely heard from people who are like, when you talk to Bill Clinton, you just feel like it's you and Bill, and that there's no one else in the room. And he can just do that, right?
Fuck, it's such a powerful skill.
Yeah.
It's such a crazy, intangible skill that some people just have that thing, and it just makes everyone...
Well, and it's, an interesting point about Trump, because obviously I'm not a fan, but I've talked to a lot of other people who aren't fans who have met him and said, oh, I met him and he's very charming, right?
Totally. I can see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not, and his former political director said, people get him wrong. They think of him as this really angry guy. Actually, all he wants to do is make everyone happy. And again, do I think that's literally true? No. And is he making me happy? He is not. But it was really revealing. It changed the way I thought about Trump.
Right.
And how he kind of responds to people, including his frustration when he feels like he's making someone an offer, right? And being like, oh, well, I'll just be happy if you do what I want. Or we meet in the middle, but you kind of kiss the ring a little bit, and then I'll take care of it. And if somebody says no, I see why he takes it so
He's
personally.
Hurt. Yeah. I don't think people think of Obama as charismatic and likable. People don't think that about Trump, but I could totally see you being around a dinner table with him and him making you feel good.
Well, and I think it's more polarizing, right? I bought a board from a guy
From Trump. Yeah.
I bought a board from a guy in Long Beach Island, New Jersey, and he was we got to talking. He asked me what I did, and I told him what I used to do at some point. And he was like, oh, I was never a big... That's a Trumpy part of New Jersey. He was like, oh, I was never big... didn't vote for him. But he always seemed like a nice guy, right? Whereas I think with Trump, I'm going to go ahead and say no one who voted for him says, oh, he seems like a nice guy, right? It's just different. Whereas
right, you don't need to be nice to be charismatic.
That's true too. And I also I think that's a disconnect where I think there's Trump, people I know who are fans of Trump who are in my family, my extended family, and I think they would say, oh no, I think he's misunderstood, right? I think you're not being fair to him. And obviously we have differences of opinion, but it's a different thing than where actually Trump is different, where you also got a lot of people who voted for him saying, I wouldn't invite him to my wedding.
Yeah.
I wouldn't hang out with the guy. He seems weird, but we need someone who's tough, or we need someone who's gonna secure the border or bring prices down or whatever the other things he ran on were. So I think there was that. He did a good job of creating for all of his differences, a very similar thing. He was creating a permission structure for people where he basically said, you don't have to like me. You just have to think that I will help you. And, we can debate, obviously, whether he's following through on that. But during the election, he was able to convince enough people, including people who didn't like him personally, that he would have their interests in mind more than his opponent. And that's just like, that's very old school politics.
Yeah, and he's managed to become one of the most powerful political figures in history as a result.
So,
what is it like for you now being on tour? Last thing I want to talk to you about, then we can wrap this up. What's it like now as you're out? You do get to, you live, in some ways a very public life because the words that you're writing are out there, the speeches that you're writing are out there, but like it does seem like you can be kind of a homebody when you want to be.
Yeah.
And now you're out as a salesman, selling the book all around. Like, are you enjoying this process?
oh yeah, I love doing this stuff. Right now, I mean, the reason I'm out here in California is just because I was doing a couple of book events. Yeah. It's not the main body of like, the book came out in June. The like truly intense 12-hour days are done. And so now it's kind of fun. You get to like actually meet people who have read it or excited about reading it. That's very cool. I think for a nonfiction book, for the most part, media these days is like helps get people's awareness more than going on a book tour. And so the book tour is almost like, I think for many authors, it's partly you get to meet readers and hopefully like develop closer relationships with them, but it's also a little bit of like, it's emotionally gratifying because you can go on TV every day or go on podcasts or whatever, and people in theory are going to read the book, and I hope anyone listening to this is out there right now
but to
picking
see
up the book.
People who have actually
but you don't know.
Yeah.
So I think, but no, I like doing this stuff. I mean, the thing I don't love about being a writer is the part where so much of your job is just sitting with yourself. Some writers love that. But I'm an extrovert who decided to write books, which is an interesting decision.
Right, yeah. David Sedaris.
Yeah, I guess so.
David Sedaris, everyone.
We can dream. Yeah,
Yes.
We'll see.
David, this was so much fun. Thank you for doing the show. Once again, if it's only drowning, I fucking love this book. So much fun for surfers and non-surfers alike. You did a good job not making it cheesy. You did. It was not easy. You did a book about surfing and friendship, and it wasn't cheesy.
All right.
It was devoid of saccharine.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Which I really appreciated, and just a damn funny writer. Where can people continue to follow you?
I am at David Litt on almost all the things. Instagram is the main one that I use, and my Substack too is called Word Salad. And so that's like my more political writing, and then Instagram is more pictures of my pets.
So much fun. Thank you so much. Bye.